We've all heard the story. Adam and Eve were the first humans created by God, placed in the Garden of Eden, and their actions set the course of human history. But what if we told you that there's more to this story than what's commonly taught? What if Adam and Eve weren't actually the first humans on Earth? There's a fascinating idea that's been whispered in certain corners of theological debate and found in some ancient, often suppressed, texts. It's the theory of the pre-Adamic race, a race of humans that existed before Adam and Eve. This isn't just some fringe concept, it's rooted in interpretations of the Bible and other ancient writings that challenge everything we thought we knew about our origins. According to traditional Christian teaching, the world was created in 6 days, and on the 6th day, God created man in his own image. But if you closely examine the wording in Genesis 1 verses 26 to 28 and compare it with Genesis 2 verses 7 to 8, you might notice something curious. The first account mentions God creating humans, male and female, without naming them. It's only in the second chapter that we get the detailed account of Adam being formed from the dust and Eve from his rib. This has led some scholars to suggest that the first chapter could be talking about a different creation, a race of humans that existed before Adam and Eve. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence comes from ancient Jewish texts, such as the Zohar and certain Gnostic writings, which hint at the existence of these pre-Adamic humans. These texts describe a world that was inhabited by beings who were human-like but not quite the same as Adam and Eve. They lived, multiplied, and even had civilizations, but for reasons lost to time, they didn't have the same direct relationship with God that Adam and Eve would later have. One character that often comes up in these discussions is Lilith. While she's more commonly known as a rebellious figure who refused to submit to Adam, some sources suggest she might have been part of this pre-Adamic race. Lilith's story, which was later suppressed and demonized, could be a remnant of an older narrative about a different kind of human who existed before the biblical Adam. If there was a race of humans before Adam and Eve, what happened to them? Were they wiped out in some cataclysm? Did they survive in some form, perhaps as the mysterious beings we read about in other mythologies, like the Nephilim or the giants mentioned later in Genesis? This opens up a whole new realm of possibilities and questions about the history of humanity. And here's where it gets really interesting. Some of these ancient texts suggest that the pre-Adamic race might not have been completely wiped out. Instead, they might have mingled with the descendants of Adam and Eve, creating a lineage that carries their ancient blood to this day. This could explain some of the strange, seemingly out-of-place elements in early biblical stories, like Cain's wife, who appears out of nowhere, or the Nephilim, who are described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Now that we've opened the door to the idea that Adam and Eve might not have been the first humans on Earth, let's turn our focus to a figure who has been both demonized and forgotten in mainstream narratives, Lilith. Many of us have heard the story of Adam and Eve, but did you know that some ancient texts suggest Adam had another wife before Eve? That's right, her name was Lilith. But who was she, and why is her story so controversial? Lilith is a figure who appears in various ancient texts, including Jewish mysticism, particularly the Kabbalah, as well as in some Christian apocryphal writings. According to these sources, Lilith was created at the same time and from the same earth as Adam. Unlike Eve, who was made from Adam's rib, Lilith was his equal in every sense. And that's where the trouble began. Lilith, as the story goes, refused to be subservient to Adam. She didn't see herself as lesser, and when Adam demanded that she submit to him, she rebelled. In some versions of the story, Lilith utters a secret, powerful name of God and flies away from Eden, leaving Adam alone. This rebellion wasn't just about defiance, it was about equality and independence, concepts that were radical and threatening to the patriarchal structures that later dominated religious interpretations. But why was Lilith's story erased from the mainstream narrative? The answer lies in the threat she posed to the established order. Lilith represented a challenge to the idea that women were to be submissive and secondary to men, a notion that became deeply ingrained in many cultures and religions. By erasing Lilith and promoting the story of Eve, who was created from Adam and designed to be his companion, a narrative of female subservience was solidified. Interestingly, after Lilith leaves Eden, some texts suggest that she becomes something much darker, a demon, often associated with night terrors and even the death of infants. This demonization of Lilith served to further distance her from the mainstream narrative, casting her not just as a rebellious woman, but as something evil and dangerous. It's a classic case of how powerful, independent women have been vilified throughout history. What's even more fascinating is how Lilith's story has evolved over time. In some traditions, she's seen as a mother of demons, a seductress who preys on men, and a killer of children. Yet, in others, especially in modern feminist interpretations, Lilith has been reclaimed as a symbol of female empowerment, a woman who refused to be controlled, even by divine decree. But there's more to this story. Lilith's connection to the pre-Adamic race we discussed earlier is one of the most intriguing aspects. Some scholars suggest that Lilith might have been part of this earlier creation, a being who existed before the creation of Adam and Eve, which could explain her resistance to Adam's authority. This theory adds another layer to the idea that the creation of Adam and Eve was not the beginning of humanity, but rather the beginning of a specific lineage, one that was designed to be more compliant and controllable. This brings us back to the overarching narrative. If there were beings like Lilith who existed before Adam and Eve, what does that say about the creation story we've been taught? Is it possible that the story of humanity is far more complex and multifaceted than we've been led to believe? And what other stories have been suppressed to maintain a certain narrative? We've unraveled the mystery surrounding a possible pre-Adamic race and Lilith, the woman before Eve. Now, let's dig deeper into one of the most iconic symbols in the story of Adam and Eve, the forbidden fruit. Everyone knows the story. The serpent tempts Eve, she eats the fruit, and humanity falls. But here's the thing, what if we've completely misunderstood what that fruit really was? First, let's clear up a common misconception. The Bible never actually says the fruit was an apple. That detail was added much later, possibly due to a translation mix-up or cultural influence. The original Hebrew word used in Genesis is peri, which simply means fruit. So, what could this fruit really represent? Some ancient texts and interpretations suggest that the fruit wasn't a literal fruit at all, but rather a symbol for something far more profound and far more dangerous. One compelling theory is that the fruit represented forbidden knowledge, particularly sexual knowledge or the awakening of human consciousness. Think about it, the moment Adam and Eve eat the fruit, they suddenly realize they're naked. They become aware of their bodies, their desires, and the complex emotions that come with them. It's as if the act of eating the fruit triggered a profound transformation in their understanding of themselves and the world around them. But why would this knowledge be forbidden? To answer that, we need to consider the context in which these stories were told and the power dynamics at play. Knowledge, especially knowledge of oneself and one's own desires, can be incredibly empowering. It can challenge the status quo, disrupt established hierarchies, and lead to a questioning of authority. By framing this knowledge as forbidden, the narrative reinforces the idea that certain truths, especially those that empower individuals, are dangerous and should be kept out of reach. This idea of the fruit representing forbidden knowledge ties back to the earlier points about Lilith and the pre-Adamic race. Lilith's rebellion against Adam was a form of seeking forbidden knowledge, knowledge of equality, autonomy, and independence. Similarly, if there were beings before Adam and Eve, they might have possessed knowledge that was considered too dangerous for humanity to inherit. This could explain why the fruit was forbidden. It wasn't just about disobedience, it was about keeping humanity in a state of ignorance and submission. Another intriguing interpretation comes from some Gnostic texts, which suggest that the serpent in the garden wasn't a villain at all, but a bringer of enlightenment, a figure trying to free humanity from the shackles of ignorance imposed by a jealous God. In this view, the fruit represents the light of knowledge, and eating it was an act of liberation, not a sin. This flips the traditional narrative on its head, portraying the fall not as a tragedy but as the beginning of human consciousness and freedom. But there's more to this story. Some scholars have suggested that the fruit could have been a hallucinogenic plant or substance, one that altered Adam and Eve's perception of reality. This theory is supported by the sudden, dramatic changes in their awareness and behavior after eating the fruit. If the fruit was a mind-altering substance, then the story of the fall takes on a new dimension. It becomes a tale about the dangers and possibilities of altered states of consciousness, and the fine line between enlightenment and destruction. This theory also connects to the broader theme of control. If the fruit was something that could expand human consciousness or unlock forbidden knowledge, then banning it was a way to keep humanity under control, to prevent us from accessing the full potential of our minds and souls. By disobeying and eating the fruit, Adam and Eve were breaking free from the limitations placed on them, stepping into a new realm of existence, one filled with both danger and possibility. So, what was the forbidden fruit? The truth is, it could be many things, literal, symbolic, or even something beyond our current understanding. But what's clear is that this fruit, whatever it was, represented a turning point in the story of humanity. Now, let's shift our focus to another pivotal character in the story of the fall, the serpent. The traditional narrative portrays the serpent as a mere snake, a cunning creature used by Satan to deceive Eve. But what if there's more to this story? In many ancient cultures, serpents were not merely animals, they were powerful symbols of wisdom, knowledge, and even immortality. In Mesopotamian and Egyptian mythology, serpents often represented both protection and danger, life and death. This dual nature of the serpent makes its role in the Garden of Eden all the more intriguing. Could it be that the serpent wasn't simply a deceiver, but a bearer of knowledge, a being that played a much larger role in the story than we've been led to believe? Let's start by considering the serpent's identity. Some early Christian writings and Gnostic texts suggest that the serpent in Eden was not just an animal but a more significant, possibly divine figure. Some interpretations even proposed that the serpent was a manifestation of Lucifer, the fallen angel, who sought to enlighten humanity by offering them the knowledge that God had forbidden. In this view, the serpent's role wasn't to lead humanity into sin, but to free them from ignorance. This interpretation challenges the traditional narrative in a big way. If the serpent was indeed a figure of enlightenment, then the act of offering the forbidden fruit to Eve takes on a new meaning. It becomes an act of rebellion against a God who wished to keep humanity in the dark. The serpent, in this light, isn't just a tempter but a liberator, a being who gave humanity the tools to become more than mere obedient creatures. But there's another layer to this story that's worth exploring. Some scholars have pointed out that in ancient Near Eastern cultures, the serpent was often associated with healing and immortality. The Sumerian god Ninjizida, for example, was depicted as a serpent and was connected to both the underworld and the tree of life. This connection raises an interesting question. Was the serpent in the Garden of Eden trying to guide Adam and Eve toward something greater, something beyond mere mortal existence? If we consider the serpent as a symbol of forbidden knowledge, it aligns perfectly with the themes we've been discussing. Just as Lilith sought autonomy and the forbidden fruit offered knowledge, the serpent provided the means to access that knowledge. It's as if all these elements were part of a larger design, one that sought to awaken humanity to its true potential, even if it meant defying divine authority. There's also the possibility that the serpent represents an ancient, pre-biblical deity or spiritual entity that was later demonized by the authors of Genesis. In many ancient cultures, the serpent was revered as a symbol of wisdom and power. The transformation of this symbol into a deceiver in the biblical narrative could reflect a broader attempt to suppress older religious traditions that didn't fit into the emerging monotheistic framework. By casting the serpent as the villain, the authors of Genesis could have been reinforcing the idea that the knowledge it offered was dangerous, something to be feared and avoided. This interpretation ties back to our earlier discussions about the suppression of knowledge and the control of narratives. Just as the pre-Adamic race and Lilith were erased or demonized, the serpent's true nature may have been deliberately obscured to maintain a certain religious and social order. The story of the fall, then, isn't just about disobedience, it's about the struggle between enlightenment and control, between knowledge and ignorance. Now, let's turn our attention to Eve herself, the central figure in the story of the fall. For centuries, Eve has been portrayed as the naive woman who succumbed to temptation, leading humanity into sin. But what if that portrayal is overly simplistic, or even deliberately misleading? The traditional narrative positions Eve as a passive figure, easily deceived by the serpent, with her actions triggering a cascade of events that led to the downfall of humanity. But when we take a closer look at the text and consider alternative interpretations, a different picture of Eve begins to emerge. One that challenges the notion of her as merely a victim, and instead, suggests she might have been a conscious, active participant in a much larger plan. To begin with, let's think about the nature of the forbidden fruit. As we discussed earlier, this fruit wasn't just about disobedience, it symbolized forbidden knowledge, the awakening of human consciousness. Eve's decision to eat the fruit, then, wasn't a simple act of temptation, it was a deliberate choice to seek out knowledge, to break free from the constraints imposed upon her. In this light, Eve's actions can be seen as a quest for empowerment, an assertion of her autonomy. But why would Eve, often depicted as innocent and unknowing, make such a bold decision? To answer this, we need to understand the cultural and theological context of the time. In many ancient cultures, women were associated with wisdom, life, and creation. The act of Eve eating the fruit could be seen as her embracing these qualities, taking the initiative to gain knowledge and understanding that was otherwise denied to her and Adam. In a sense, Eve becomes not just the first woman, but the first philosopher, the first seeker of truth in human history. Moreover, some interpretations suggest that Eve's role was not just about disobedience, but about initiating a necessary change. Consider this, without the fall, humanity would have remained in a state of innocence, but also ignorance. By eating the fruit, Eve set in motion the events that would lead to the development of human civilization, the pursuit of knowledge, and the growth of human society. In this sense, Eve's actions were the catalyst for progress, for the evolution of humanity from a state of simplicity to one of complexity and growth. This interpretation aligns with some early Christian and Gnostic texts that portray Eve not as a sinner, but as a heroine. In these texts, Eve's decision to eat the fruit is seen as an act of liberation, freeing humanity from the limitations imposed by a jealous and controlling deity. Instead of being blamed for humanity's downfall, Eve is celebrated as the one who opened the door to human potential, to the possibility of enlightenment and understanding. But why has this interpretation been suppressed? The answer likely lies in the patriarchal structures that have dominated religious interpretation for centuries. By portraying Eve as the cause of humanity's downfall, these structures reinforce the idea of female subservience and the dangers of female autonomy. Eve's story was used to justify the marginalization of women, to instill fear of female power, and to maintain male dominance in religious and social hierarchies. So, was Eve merely a victim of the serpent's cunning, or was she a rebel with a cause? By asking this question, we open up new ways of understanding one of the most famous stories in human history. We see Eve not just as a figure in a tale of sin and punishment, but as a symbol of the human desire to seek out knowledge, to challenge the status quo, and to embrace the unknown, no matter the consequences. Let's shift our focus to one of the most intriguing yet often overlooked aspects of the story, the children of Adam and Eve. Most of us are familiar with Cain and Abel, but there's a lot more to this part of the story than meets the eye. Cain, the firstborn son of Adam and Eve. We all know the tragic story of how Cain, driven by jealousy, killed his brother Abel. But there's a detail in the narrative that raises some interesting questions. After Cain kills Abel, he is cursed by God and driven out to wander the earth. Cain then settles in the land of Nod, east of Eden, where he takes a wife and starts a family. But here's the mystery: where did Cain's wife come from? The Bible doesn't provide an explicit answer, leaving this as one of the great unanswered questions in the Genesis narrative. However, some ancient texts and interpretations suggest that Cain's wife might not have been a daughter of Adam and Eve, but rather a member of that earlier, pre-Adamic race we discussed earlier. If this is true, it would mean that the descendants of Adam and Eve, through Cain, were not purely of Adamic origin, but a hybrid lineage that included the blood of these mysterious earlier beings. This theory not only answers the question of where Cain's wife came from, but also adds a new dimension to the story of humanity's early history. It suggests that the human race, as we know it, may have begun as a blend of different lineages, with Adam and Eve's descendants mixing with other, older races that already existed on Earth. This idea challenges the traditional narrative that humanity started with a single, pure lineage and opens up the possibility that our origins are far more complex and intertwined than we've been led to believe. But Cain's story is just the beginning. There's also the lesser-known figure of Seth, Adam and Eve's third son, who is often portrayed as the righteous successor to Abel. According to some traditions, Seth's descendants were the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6, who took the daughters of men as wives, leading to the birth of the Nephilim, a race of giants. These giants are described as mighty men of renown, but their origins are shrouded in mystery. The story of the Nephilim is another one of those biblical accounts that leaves us with more questions than answers. Were these giants merely the offspring of Seth's descendants and ordinary human women, or was there something more otherworldly about them? Some interpretations suggest that the Nephilim were the result of a mingling of divine beings with humans, or perhaps even the remnants of that pre-Adamic race, now mixed with the blood of Adam and Eve's descendants. What's particularly fascinating is how this concept of hybrid lineages ties back to the broader themes we've been exploring. Just as Eve's decision to eat the forbidden fruit set in motion a chain of events that led to the growth of human civilization, the mingling of different lineages, whether through Cain, Seth, or the Nephilim, could be seen as part of a larger process of human evolution. This process wasn't just about physical growth, but about the development of knowledge, culture, and the human spirit. Moreover, the idea of hidden lineages and hybrid bloodlines could explain some of the more mysterious aspects of early human history. Why do so many ancient cultures have legends of giants, beings of great power and knowledge, who eventually disappeared from the earth? Could these legends be distant memories of the Nephilim, or perhaps even of the earlier, pre-Adamic beings who mingled with humanity? This perspective also raises intriguing questions about what it means to be human. If our lineage is a mix of different races, some perhaps older and wiser than our own, how does that affect our understanding of our place in the world? Are we the combination of these ancient lineages, or merely one part of a much larger, ongoing story of evolution and growth? There's one more layer to explore, one that ties all these threads together and points to a much larger, cosmic conflict that may have been unfolding behind the scenes, the possibility of a hidden cosmic war. The traditional narrative of the fall presents it as a simple story of disobedience and punishment. Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, and as a result, they're expelled from the Garden of Eden. But what if this event was just the tip of the iceberg? What if the fall was part of a much larger struggle, a cosmic battle between divine forces that shaped not only the fate of Adam and Eve, but the entire course of human history? Let's start by considering the role of the serpent. As we discussed earlier, some interpretations suggest that the serpent was not merely a deceiver, but a being of great power and knowledge, possibly even a fallen angel or a manifestation of Lucifer. If that's the case, then the serpent's temptation of Eve was not just a random act of defiance, but a calculated move in a larger battle against God's plan for humanity. This wasn't just about tricking Eve, it was about initiating a rebellion, one that would set the stage for a cosmic war between good and evil. This idea of a cosmic conflict is supported by various ancient texts and religious traditions. In some Gnostic writings, the material world is seen as a battleground between the forces of light and darkness, with humanity caught in the middle. The fall of Adam and Eve, in this context, represents not just a moral failing, but the opening salvo in a war that has been raging since the dawn of time. The knowledge that Adam and Eve gained from the forbidden fruit wasn't just a curse, it was a weapon, a tool that could be used in the ongoing struggle between these cosmic forces. But what were the stakes of this war? If we look at the broader narrative of the Bible, we see hints of a larger conflict playing out. The story of the Nephilim, for instance, suggests that there were beings of great power and influence who were deeply involved in humanity's early history. Were these beings part of the same cosmic conflict? Did they represent the forces of darkness, seeking to corrupt and control humanity, or were they remnants of a lost, divine lineage, fighting to preserve their place in the world? The expulsion of Adam and Eve from Eden can be seen as a strategic move in this cosmic war. By driving them out of paradise and into the harsh, unforgiving world, God was not merely punishing them but preparing them for the battles to come. Humanity, now armed with the knowledge of good and evil, would have to navigate a world filled with dangers and temptations, all while being influenced by unseen forces vying for control of their destiny. As we piece together these clues, a new narrative begins to emerge, one that presents the fall not as the end of a story, but as the beginning of an epic struggle. This struggle would shape the course of human history, influencing the rise and fall of civilizations, the spread of religions, and the development of moral and ethical systems. The cosmic war that began with the fall continues to this day, with humanity still caught in the middle, striving to find its way in a world that is both beautiful and perilous. In light of this, the story of Adam and Eve takes on a new significance. It's not just a tale of innocence lost, but a story of awakening, of humanity stepping into a larger, more complex reality where every choice has consequences, and where the battle between light and darkness is fought not just in the heavens, but in the hearts and minds of every human being. Thank you for watching and joining us on this deep dive into one of the most profound and mysterious stories ever told. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay tuned for more explorations into the hidden truths of our past. Your engagement means a lot, and it helps keep these conversations alive. God bless you all.